Lieutenant Commander Marcus Thorne, a decorated Navy SEAL, vanished from the South China Sea in 2014. For 10 excruciating years, his case was a ghost, a cold file buried under the weight of official declarations and the crushing certainty of the sea. His fiancée was left with nothing but a folded flag and a lifetime of questions. The world believed he was dead, a hero lost to the unforgiving depths. Then, a decade later, Facebook's algorithm made a chillingly casual suggestion, a digital whisper from beyond the grave that would unravel a conspiracy so deep it threatened to shake the very foundations of trust and loyalty. What it revealed was a truth more shocking than his disappearance and more terrifying than his presumed death. Dr. Anya Sharma met Marcus Thorne not as a hardened warrior, but as a man who had a quiet intensity that balanced the chaos of her world as a surgical resident. He was tall and lean, with a frame forged by the most grueling training imaginable, but his eyes held a disarming gentleness. They were the color of the sea he so often spoke of, sometimes calm and reflective, other times stormy and unreadable. He had a laugh that was rare but genuine, a deep rumble that seemed to come from his very core. He wasn't a man of many words, but the ones he chose always mattered. He spoke of loyalty, of brotherhood, and of a profound sense of duty that was woven into his soul. His personality was a study in contrasts, the elite operator who could spend hours silently observing a target, and the tender partner who would patiently help Anya memorize complex anatomical charts, turning it into a game. He'd quiz her on the brachial plexus while they cooked dinner, his serious expression breaking into a wide grin when she finally got it right. He was grounded. He found peace not in the adrenaline of his work, but in the simple act of building a life with her. Their small apartment was filled with books on history and medicine, a testament to their two different worlds colliding into one. His ambition wasn't about medals or rank. It was about finishing his service and starting the next chapter. He wanted to build a custom motorcycle from scratch, teach high school history, and raise a family far from the sea and its secrets. The emotional stakes were everything. They were 2 weeks away from setting a wedding date. Marcus had already shown his mother the ring he'd bought, a simple platinum band with a single, elegant diamond he'd said was as clear and strong as Anya. He carried it with him on every mission, tucked into a sealed pouch in his gear, a tangible reminder of the future he was fighting to return to. His family, a tight-knit unit from rural Oregon, adored Anya. His father, a retired lumber mill foreman, saw in her a strength that matched his son's. His mother treated her like the daughter she never had. They were already a family, just waiting for the ceremony to make it official. One of Anya's most cherished memories was a weekend they spent in a cabin near Mount Hood. Marcus, who had survived the most inhospitable environments on Earth, was hilariously inept at starting a fire in the old wood stove. He, the man who could build a shelter out of jungle vines, was defeated by a damp log. Anya, laughing, had shown him the trick her grandfather had taught her, using a bit of lint and chapstick. He had watched her with a look of pure admiration, a look that said more than any words ever could. It was a moment of perfect, simple domesticity that stood in stark contrast to the violent, classified nature of his profession. On their last night together before his final deployment, they didn't talk about the mission. Instead, they planned a trip to Italy. Marcus wanted to see the Colosseum. Anya wanted to eat pasta in a tiny, family-run trattoria in Tuscany. They laid on the floor, tracing routes on an old map, their fingers intertwining. He promised her that when he got back, it would be his last deployment. He was done. He was ready to come home for good. It was this promise, this vivid picture of a life just within their grasp, that made his disappearance so utterly devastating. The life that was stolen wasn't just his. It was theirs. It was a future filled with laughter, history lessons, and maybe a child who would have his father's sea-blue eyes. The loss wasn't an abstraction. It was 1,000 unborn moments, a universe of shared experiences that collapsed into a single, crushing point of absence. The mission was codenamed Operation Night Serpent. The objective was clandestine reconnaissance of a newly constructed, undeclared naval installation on a remote island in the Paracel chain, deep within contested waters. The intelligence was time-sensitive. Satellite imagery showed activity, but they needed to know specifics. radar capabilities, submarine pen dimensions, troop presence. It was a job for the best, which meant Marcus and his swim buddy, Petty Officer Kyle Rico Ramirez, a gifted but relatively new SEAL whom Marcus had taken under his wing. The insertion was to be from the USS Virginia, a nuclear submarine lurking silently hundreds of feet below the turbulent surface of the South China Sea. The plan was textbook: launch in their sealed delivery vehicle, or SDV, a 20-foot-long miniature submarine often called the Sleeping Beauty. They would pilot the unlit craft through miles of dark water, navigating by instruments and instinct. They would moor the SDV on the seafloor, swim the final 1,000 yards to the target, plant unobtrusive microsensors, take photographic evidence, and exfiltrate before sunrise. Simple on paper, infinitely complex in practice. The tension began before they even entered the water. The weather report was deteriorating faster than predicted. A tropical squall was forming, churning the surface into a chaotic mess, which was both a blessing and a curse. It would mask their acoustic signature, but made the sea state dangerously unpredictable, with powerful, erratic currents. The final briefing was tense. The sub's captain expressed his concerns, but the admiral on the satellite link was adamant. The intelligence window was closing. The mission was a go. As Marcus and Rico suited up in the sub's lockout chamber, the mood was quiet and professional. Marcus did his final checks on Rico's gear with a practiced, paternal calm. "Stay frosty. Breathe slow," he said, his voice steady through the comms. "The water doesn't care how tough you are. Respect it." Rico, jittery with a mix of fear and excitement, gave a sharp nod. "Got it, LT." A seemingly insignificant detail emerged during the gear check. The SDV's primary navigation system had been glitchy during diagnostics. A technician had supposedly fixed it, replacing a guidance chip, but noted in the log that the unit was running hot. The backup system was reliable, but less precise. It was a minor yellow flag in a sea of red ones, easily dismissed under the pressure of the launch clock. They slipped into the black, torpedo-like SDV. The small cockpit was illuminated by the green glow of the instruments. Through the small forward viewport, there was only blackness. The lockout chamber flooded, the outer hatch opened, and with a soft whir they were released into the immense, crushing pressure of the deep. The journey started smoothly. They were a ghost in the water, a silent predator moving toward its objective. But then the storm hit. The effects reached them even hundreds of feet down. The SDV was tossed by unseen currents, massive surges of water that threw them off course and forced Marcus to fight the controls. The comms linked to the submarine became intermittent, filled with static. Then, a new threat. A proximity alert blared. An unidentified submerged contact moving fast. It wasn't a submarine, it was too small. A Chinese fast attack submersible, a maritime drone, or something else entirely. It wasn't on any intelligence reports. They were supposed to be alone. Marcus killed their minimal power, letting them drift, hoping to hide in the ocean's background noise. The contact swept past them, close enough that they felt the pressure wave. It was a heart-stopping moment. The glitchy navigation system chose that exact moment to flicker and die. "Switching to backup," Marcus stated calmly, his hands moving with practiced efficiency. "Rico, keep your eyes peeled. We're flying blind." They were now off course in a storm, with a dead primary nav system and an unknown enemy lurking in the dark. The risk had compounded exponentially. The final communication received by the USS Virginia was a clipped static-laced transmission from Marcus. Compromised, contact, evading to. The rest was lost to the sea's roar. It was a fatal mistake to push forward, but retreat was no longer an option. They were in the serpent's maw, and what happened next would create a mystery that would endure for a decade. The pre-dawn hours aboard the USS Virginia were thick with a strained, anxious silence. The window for Operation Night Serpent's return was closing. The squall on the surface had been upgraded to a tropical storm, a raging monster that made communication nearly impossible. The submarine's commander, a man named Captain Eva Rostova, stared at the sonar display, her face a mask of controlled concern. Every man in the control room was pretending to be busy, but their attention was focused on the empty space on the screen, where the SDV's faint signature should have been. The scheduled return time came and went. Then, 30 minutes past the deadline. The sonar operator stiffened. Contact bearing 090. Faint, but it's there. It's the SDV's acoustic profile, ma'am. It's erratic. Hope, sharp and electric, shot through the room. Bring her in, Rostova ordered. The submarine maneuvered, its massive frame moving with surprising grace. The recovery team stood by in the hangar bay, ready to retrieve the mini-sub. As the SDV was guided into its docking cradle, the relief in the room was palpable, but it was short-lived. The moment the craft was secure, the external cameras relayed a horrifying image to the control room monitors. The acrylic canopy of the SDV cockpit was spiderwebbed with cracks. A long, deep gash ran along the port side of the vehicle, a violent scar of twisted metal. It wasn't the kind of damage you get from hitting a coral reef. It was sharp, incisive, almost surgical. Panic began to curdle the Hope. "Get that hatch open now." Rostova's voice boomed over the intercom. The hangar crew scrambled, their movements frantic. They pried open the damaged hatch. Inside, Petty Officer Rico Ramirez was slumped over the controls, unconscious. His rebreather was askew, and his face was pale. The other seat, the pilot's seat, was empty. Lieutenant Commander Marcus Thorne was gone. Medics swarmed the SDV, carefully extracting Ramirez and rushing him to the sub's small infirmary. The initial diagnosis was severe decompression sickness, the bends, and a concussion. He was alive, but barely. The hangar was now a crime scene. Rostova stood over the empty cockpit, her face grim. The seatbelts on Marcus's side were unbuckled. His rebreather was gone, but his dive knife, a custom-made blade he never went anywhere without, was still strapped to his leg harness, which lay discarded on the floor of the vehicle. Why would he leave his knife? And why was the harness unbuckled and left behind? It made no sense. A quick inventory revealed another strange clue. A small watertight pouch that Marcus always carried, the one containing his good luck charms and the ring for Anya, was also gone. But a single expended flare casing was found wedged under the seat. Flares were emergency equipment, used for signaling on the surface. Why would one be fired from inside a submerged vehicle? The confusion was mounting. The 911 call in this scenario was the flash message sent from the USS Virginia to Fleet Command in Hawaii. The transcript, highly classified, would have read something like this: Top secret, Night Serpent partial success. SDV recovered, Pilot 1, Thorne M, is MIA. Pilot 2, Ramirez K, recovered unconscious, critical condition. Vehicle sustained significant unidentified damage. Request immediate SAR, possible hostile contact. Urgent. The disbelief on the submarine was absolute. SEALs don't just vanish. They are the most resilient, well-trained operators on the planet. For one to disappear from a sealed vehicle, deep underwater, leaving behind his partner and crucial equipment, was unthinkable. The initial theory was a catastrophic hull breach. Maybe Marcus was ripped from the vehicle, but the damage, while severe, didn't look explosive, and it didn't explain the unbuckled harness or the missing pouch. As the sub's doctor worked to stabilize Ramirez, the initial wave of shock on board began to transform into a cold, creeping dread. They hadn't just lost a man. They had stumbled into something far darker, a puzzle where every piece felt wrong, every clue only deepening the impossibility of it all. The official search began within hours, a massive and desperate undertaking. The U.S. Navy mobilized assets from the 7th Fleet. Destroyers, cruisers, and maritime patrol aircraft were diverted to the last known coordinates of Operation Night Serpent. The storm, however, had blossomed into a full-blown typhoon, a swirling vortex of wind and water that turned the South China Sea into a gray, violent hellscape. Waves the size of 3-story buildings crashed over the decks of the search vessels. Helicopter sorties were suicidal. The search was, for the first critical 48 hours, almost entirely theoretical, a matter of plotting drift patterns on a map while being unable to physically look. The external conflicts began immediately. The search area bordered on waters claimed by China, and Beijing was not cooperative. They issued a stern diplomatic protest, accusing the U.S. of violating their sovereignty and warning naval ships not to enter their claimed territory. This created a tense standoff. While American and Chinese diplomats argued in sterile conference rooms, the clock was ticking for Marcus Thorne. The search was being actively hindered by international politics, confined to a specific grid that might not even be the right one. The frustration on the USS Virginia and at Fleet Command was immense. They were fighting a storm and a foreign power at the same time. A tragic accident underscored the danger and futility of the effort. On the third day, a window in the weather allowed a Seahawk helicopter to launch from the USS John C. Stennis. As it hovered low over the churning waves, a rogue wave slammed against its fuselage, and a sudden violent downdraft caught the rotors. The helicopter crashed into the sea, killing 2 of its 4 crew members. The search for one lost man had now cost 2 more lives. The tragedy sent a shockwave through the operation, forcing a major reevaluation of the risks. The search was scaled back, becoming less aggressive, more cautious. Meanwhile, Petty Officer Ramirez was airlifted to a naval hospital in Japan. When he finally regained consciousness, the news was devastating. He had retrograde amnesia caused by the concussion and the trauma of rapid, uncontrolled ascent. He remembered suiting up. He remembered launching. And then, nothing. His memory was a black hole from the moment they encountered the unknown sonar contact until he woke up in a hospital bed. His testimony, the one thing that could have provided answers, was a blank page. The Navy's underwater search methodologies were state-of-the-art. They deployed deep-sea drones, unmanned submersibles equipped with side-scan sonar, to comb the seabed. They mapped hundreds of square miles of ocean floor, looking for any sign of Marcus. A piece of equipment, his rebreather, his body. But the ocean floor in that region is a chaotic landscape of canyons, trenches, and volcanic rock, and the typhoon had likely buried any evidence under tons of shifted silt. They found nothing. For Anya and Marcus's family, this period was an agonizing torture. They were flown to Hawaii and put in a hotel, where they were given daily briefings by a rear admiral who spoke in carefully chosen, evasive language. Anya grew increasingly frustrated. She was a scientist, a surgeon. She demanded data, sonar maps, a clear explanation for the gash on the SDV. The Navy's official line was that the damage was likely caused by a collision with unmapped submerged debris, exacerbated by the storm. They called the MIA status a tragic accident in extreme conditions. Anya didn't buy it. She confronted the admiral. "Debris doesn't hunt you," she argued, her voice shaking with rage and grief. "Debris doesn't leave a clean gash and take a man without a trace. You're not telling us something." The admiral's face was a stony mask of bureaucratic sympathy. The investigation was ongoing, he said. National security was involved. He couldn't share operational details. The family felt stonewalled, shut out. They were being managed, not informed. After 3 weeks of fruitless searching with no new leads and mounting political pressure, the active search was officially called off. Marcus Thorne was declared lost at sea, presumed deceased. The formal investigation concluded with a heavily redacted report citing a catastrophic equipment malfunction during extreme weather, leading to a fatal underwater event. The failure was absolute. They had the wrong search area, hampered by a storm and a hostile government. Their only witness had amnesia. The physical evidence on the SDV was inconclusive. The truth was, the official search never stood a chance because it was looking for the victim of an accident, not the target of an abduction. The years that followed were a long, slow grind of unresolved grief. The case of Lieutenant Commander Marcus Thorne went cold, filed away in a vault of military secrets and tragedies. For the world, he became a name etched onto the black granite of the SEAL Memorial at Virginia Beach, one hero among many. But for his family and for Anya, he became a ghost who haunted their every waking moment. The absence of a body was a uniquely cruel torture. There was no grave to visit, no final resting place to provide a sense of closure. There was only the vast, indifferent ocean. Anya tried to move on, but the promise she had made to him, the future they had planned, was a phantom limb she could feel with every breath. She threw herself into her work, becoming one of the most sought-after trauma surgeons in the country. Her hands, which she had once imagined holding his, now worked tirelessly to piece together the broken bodies of others. It was a penance, a way to channel her helpless rage into something constructive. She never dated again. How could she, when the great love of her life was not definitively dead, but simply gone? She lived in a state of suspended animation, her heart frozen in 2014. In the SEAL community, Marcus's story became a piece of grim folklore. New trainees were told about the legend of Night Serpent, a cautionary tale about the unpredictable dangers of the deep. He became a symbol of the ultimate sacrifice, the operator swallowed by the very environment he was trained to master. The official story held, but whispers and theories persisted in quiet conversations in base bars and locker rooms. Some said he was taken by the Chinese. Others believed there was a cover-up, that the mission was a catastrophic failure the Navy wanted to bury. But without evidence, these were just stories, dissipating like smoke. The empty space he left became a grim landmark in the lives of those who loved him. His parents aged dramatically, the light in their eyes dimmed by a decade of unanswered questions. Every year on the anniversary of his disappearance, they would drive to the Oregon coast and throw a single white rose into the Pacific, a small ritual of remembrance for a son the ocean had claimed. Anya's apartment remained a museum of their life together. His books on history were still on the shelf. A framed photo of them on Mount Hood, the one from the weekend he couldn't start the fire, sat on her bedside table. She couldn't bring herself to put it away. For 10 years, hope slowly withered, replaced by a deep, hollow ache of acceptance. The mystery of his vanishing was no longer a puzzle to be solved, but a permanent scar on their souls. The world had moved on. The South China Sea remained a geopolitical hotspot, new crises erasing the memory of old ones. The name Marcus Thorne was forgotten by all but a handful of people who were bound together by a shared, unending loss. They were a small, sad club, living in the long, cold shadow of a single event, the ripple effects of which had defined a decade of their lives. The case wasn't just cold, it was frozen solid, buried under years of silence and the official stamp of a closed investigation. There was no reason to believe it would ever be reopened. Then, on a Tuesday evening in late October 2024, the ice began to crack. The catalyst was not a deathbed confession or a newly declassified document. It was something far more mundane, more chillingly modern. Anya was at home after a grueling 36-hour shift at the hospital. Exhausted, she was aimlessly scrolling through her Facebook feed, a mindless habit to decompress. Her thumb flicked past political rants, vacation photos, and baby announcements. And then she saw it. Tucked into the People You May Know sidebar, a feature she usually ignored, was a profile. The name was unfamiliar. Amir al-Hassan. The profile picture was a low-resolution shot of a man with a thick, dark beard and sunglasses, standing in what looked like a crowded Middle Eastern market. He was weathered, older, but there was something in the set of his jaw, the shape of his brow, that made Anya pause. Her thumb hovered over the screen. It was a flicker of recognition so faint she almost dismissed it. There are only so many types of faces in the world, she told herself. It was a coincidence, but she couldn't look away. Her heart began to beat a little faster. She clicked on the profile. It was mostly private, with very little public information. The location was listed as a small, dusty city in a semi-autonomous region of Yemen. There were only a handful of public photos, all of them grainy, showing desert landscapes and ancient-looking buildings. But in one photo, he was standing with a group of other men, and he had taken his sunglasses off. Anya's breath caught in her throat. The eyes. They were a decade older, hardened by things she couldn't imagine, but they were his. They were Marcus's sea-blue eyes. Her rational mind, the surgeon's mind, screamed at her. It's impossible. It's wishful thinking, grief playing tricks on you. But her heart, the part of her that had remained frozen in time, knew. She frantically looked for a mutual friend, some connection that would explain this digital apparition. There was none. Why would Facebook's cold, unfeeling algorithm connect her, a surgeon in San Diego, to this man in Yemen? It made no sense. This was the pivotal moment. The narrative of her life, a story of grief and acceptance, was shattered in an instant. This wasn't a ghost from the past. It was a potential lead in the present. The hopelessness that had defined her existence for 10 years was suddenly replaced by a terrifying, electrifying surge of hope. This single coincidental recommendation was a key turning a lock that everyone believed had been permanently rusted shut. She saved the profile picture, her hand trembling so badly she could barely control the mouse. She zoomed in, the image pixelating, but the truth was still there, hiding behind the beard and the years. It was him. The discovery was not a gentle revelation. It was a violent shock to her system. The cold case wasn't cold anymore. A single inexplicable digital breadcrumb, left by an algorithm that saw a pattern humans could not, had just reignited a 10-year-old mystery. The shift was seismic. The question was no longer, how do I live with this loss? It was now, how do I find him? Anya didn't sleep. The image of the man named Amir al-Hassan was burned into her mind. Her first instinct was to call the Navy, to show them the proof. But a decade of being stonewalled had taught her a bitter lesson. The official channels were a dead end. They had closed the book on Marcus Thorne. Reopening it would mean admitting a colossal failure, or worse, a cover-up. They would dismiss her, call her hysterical, bury the lead in bureaucratic red tape. She needed someone who operated outside the lines, someone who valued loyalty above protocol. There was only one name, Master Chief Herschel, Sully Sullivan, retired. Sully had been Marcus's mentor in the teams, the man who had shaped him from a raw recruit into an elite operator. Now in his late 60s, he ran a small charter fishing business out of Key West, but Anya knew that beneath the sun-weathered exterior was a mind as sharp and dangerous as ever. She flew to Florida the next day. She found Sully on his boat, mending a net. He looked up as she approached, his eyes squinting in the sun. He recognized her immediately. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. She handed him her phone. "Look at this," she said, her voice tight. Sully looked at the profile, his expression unreadable. He listened intently as she explained the algorithm, the location, the eyes. He was silent for a long time, studying the photo. "Anya," he said gently, "a lot of guys have blue eyes. You've been through hell. The mind can play tricks." "It's him, Sully," she insisted, her voice cracking. "I know it is." She showed him the other photo, the group shot. She had already spent hours analyzing it. "Look at his left forearm," she said, pointing. "Zoom in." Sully did. Even in the grainy image, a faint silvery line was visible on the man's arm. "The rope burn," Sully whispered, his voice suddenly thick. "He got that in the third week of Bud S. Hell Week. A training rope snapped and laid his arm open. I stitched him up myself, right here in my kitchen. The scar is unique." In that moment, Sully's skepticism evaporated, replaced by a cold fury. It was him. This was not a ghost. This was a mission. Sully activated a network that the Navy didn't even know existed, the informal brotherhood of retired special operators. He made one call to a man named Cortland Court Vance, a former Delta Force operator who now ran a high-end private security firm that specialized in extra-legal repatriations. In other words, he got people out of places they weren't supposed to be. Court owed Sully a life debt from an old operation in Bosnia. When Sully called, there was no hesitation. The new investigation began immediately, a shadow operation funded by Court's considerable resources. They weren't cops. They were hunters. Court's team of analysts went to work on the digital trail. They scrubbed the metadata from the photos, which had been uploaded from a satellite internet connection originating from a specific compound in the Yemeni desert. They cross-referenced the name Amir al-Hassan with intelligence databases. The name didn't exist before 9 years ago. It was a clean identity, professionally crafted. While the tech team worked, Anya provided the human intelligence. She recounted every detail of Marcus's life, every scar, every habit, every unique skill he possessed. She remembered he had a photographic memory for maps and a peculiar habit of tapping his fingers in a specific rhythm when he was thinking, a nervous tic from childhood. These were the details that would help them identify him for certain. The investigation on the ground was even more dangerous. Court dispatched a 2-man reconnaissance team, former operators who could blend in. Posing as freelance journalists, they traveled to the region. They confirmed the compound belonged to a powerful local warlord, a man who had risen to prominence over the last decade with the help of a mysterious, highly effective Western security advisor known only as the Emir. This advisor had trained his militia, planned his battles, and turned his ragtag group into a formidable fighting force. The pieces were locking into place. Marcus wasn't a prisoner. He was an asset. The climax came swiftly. The plan was not a full-scale assault. It was a surgical snatch and grab. Using a drone, they monitored the compound for days. They learned the advisor's routine. Every evening, he would walk to a high point on the edge of the compound to watch the sunset, alone. That was their window. Sully and Anya insisted on being there, at a nearby command post Court had set up in a neighboring country. They watched the drone feed on a monitor, their hearts pounding. The team, led by Court himself, moved in at dusk. Dressed in local garb, they approached the compound from the blind side. The feed was tense. They saw the figure walk to the overlook. It was him. He was thinner, his face harder, but it was Marcus. Court and one other man approached him silently. "Marcus Thorne," Court said, his voice low and steady. The man turned, his hand instantly going to a pistol on his hip. His eyes were cold, confused. "You have the wrong man," he said in perfect, unaccented English. There was no recognition. "Anya is waiting for you," Court said, using the trigger name they had agreed upon. The man's expression flickered, a flash of confusion, of something buried deep. It was all the distraction Court needed. His partner fired a tranquilizer dart, hitting the man in the neck. As he slumped, the warlord's guards, hearing the muffled sound, were alerted. A firefight erupted. Court's team laid down suppressive fire, dragging the unconscious Marcus with them. The exfiltration was a storm of controlled violence. They fought their way back to their vehicle under a hail of gunfire, escaping into the desert night. On the drone feed, Anya and Sully watched, breathless, as the vehicle's headlights disappeared into the darkness. They had him. But the man they had, the cold-eyed stranger known as Amir al-Hassan, was not the Marcus Thorne they had lost. The central question of what happened was only beginning to be answered. He wasn't lost at sea. He was taken. His mind had been wiped clean, his skills repurposed. The mystery of his disappearance was solved, but the mystery of his identity had just begun. The journey back was a blur of private jets and clandestine handoffs, orchestrated by Cortland Vance's shadowy organization. They brought Marcus, still heavily sedated, to a secure private medical facility in the Swiss Alps. It was a place designed for people who needed to disappear while they healed. As Marcus slept, the full, horrifying story of the last 10 years began to surface, pieced together from Court's intelligence sources and a debrief with a high-level defector their actions had shaken loose. It wasn't the Chinese. It was a rogue cell within the intelligence agency of a supposed ally nation. This cell, led by a man named Anton Durov, specialized in a brutal and highly illegal form of human asset acquisition. They didn't recruit spies. They stole them. Their goal was to acquire highly trained Western military operators, erase their identities through a combination of psychotropic drugs, hypnosis, and induced trauma, and then sell their skills to the highest bidder on the global black market. Marcus Thorne was their prize catch. On the night of Operation Night Serpent, they had been waiting. They had an inside man, a senior officer in U.S. Naval Intelligence named Commander Philip Weston, who had a massive gambling debt. For $2 million, Weston had provided Durov's team with the mission parameters, the SDV's acoustic profile, and its operational weaknesses. He also fed the Navy false telemetry during the storm, directing the official search hundreds of miles away from the real incident site. Durov's team used a small, stealth submersible to intercept Marcus and Rico. They disabled the SDV with a targeted magnetic pulse weapon, which fried the navigation system. They then used a cutting laser to slice open the hull. They abducted Marcus, but in the chaos, Rico's rebreather malfunctioned, and he suffered a rapid, uncontrolled ascent, causing the brain damage that erased his memory. They took an unconscious Marcus to a secret facility in Eastern Europe, a place that was a relic of the Cold War. For nearly a year, he was subjected to a systematic and cruel process of breaking him down and rebuilding him. They erased his past, his name, his love for Anya. They implanted a new identity, Amir al-Hassan, and a new history. They turned him into a blank slate, a weapon to be programmed. Once his reprogramming was complete, they sold him to the Yemeni warlord, who was flush with oil money and needed a military genius to consolidate his power. Marcus, or Amir, had spent the next 9 years as the architect of the warlord's brutal regime. His SEAL training twisted into a tool for a tyrant. The why was sickeningly simple: greed and power. Weston wanted money. Durov and his cell wanted to create a deniable, for-profit army of ghost soldiers. While this information was being uncovered, arrests were quietly made. A team of federal agents, tipped off by court's untraceable report, descended on Philip Weston's lavish retirement home in Virginia. The evidence was irrefutable. Weston confessed to everything. Internationally, the fallout was contained through back channels. Durov and his cell were neutralized by the host nation's own government, eager to avoid a public scandal with the United States. In the sterile white room in Switzerland, Marcus finally woke up. He looked at Anya, who was sitting by his bed, with the same cold, blank confusion he'd shown in the desert. The man she loved was physically there, but his mind, his soul, was still a prisoner somewhere else. The aftermath of the revelation was not a celebration. It was the beginning of a new, more difficult war. The fight to bring Marcus's mind back from the void. The conspiracy was exposed, the villains were caught, but the true damage was sitting in a hospital bed, looking at the love of his life as if she were a complete stranger. The recovery was not a Hollywood moment of sudden, dramatic recollection. It was a slow, painstaking process, a delicate archaeology of a shattered mind. A team of the world's best neurologists and psychiatrists worked with Marcus. Anya was the cornerstone of the therapy. She was told to create an environment of familiarity, to reintroduce him to his own life, piece by piece. She brought his favorite things to the sterile room: his worn copy of The Gates of Fire, the soft Oregon Ducks sweatshirt he loved to wear on lazy Sundays, a speaker playing the indie rock bands they used to listen to on road trips. At first, he was resistant, suspicious. The Amir persona was a hard shell, a defense mechanism built over a decade of survival. He was quiet, watchful, and spoke only when spoken to. Anya would sit with him for hours, not pushing, just talking. She told him stories of their life together. She told him about the disastrous fire-starting incident at Mount Hood, about their plans for Italy, about his father's gruff pride and his mother's warm hugs. She showed him photos, not asking if he remembered, but simply describing the moments. "This was us," she would say softly. "After you taught me how to change a tire. You were so proud I didn't get any grease on my shirt." For weeks there was nothing. No flicker of recognition. Only the blank, guarded stare. The doctors warned her to be patient, that the trauma was profound. The relief of having him back was constantly at war with the agonizing pain of his vacancy. He was a living ghost, a stranger in a familiar body. The breakthrough came one afternoon. Anya was reading to him from a book of poetry, something they had never done, but she was running out of stories. She was reading a poem about the sea when he spoke, his voice raspy. "The pressure," he said, staring at the wall. "I remember the pressure. And the cold." It was the first piece of his old memory to surface. It was a crack in the dam. From that day on, small fragments began to return. Disjointed images of the inside of the SDV, the green glow of the instruments, a flash of another vessel in the dark. He started asking questions. "Who was Rico?" he asked one day, the name surfacing from the depths. Anya, with tears in her eyes, told him about his swim buddy, his protege. The most powerful moment came a month into his therapy. Anya was describing the ring he had carried, the promise it represented. He had been staring at his hands. He began tapping his fingers on the table, a restless, rhythmic pattern. It was his tick, the one she had told the rescue team about. It was a subconscious echo of the old Marcus. She stopped talking and just watched him. He looked up, his blue eyes finally focusing on her, truly seeing her for the first time. He didn't say her name. He didn't say, "I remember." He just reached out, his hand trembling slightly, and touched the photo of them on the bedside table. A single tear rolled down his cheek. It wasn't a full return, but it was a connection. It was the first sign that Marcus Thorne, not Amir al-Hassan, was still in there. The relief that washed over Anya was overwhelming, a tidal wave of emotion held back for a decade. The years had not been wasted. Her love had not been in vain. He was coming home. The story of Lieutenant Commander Marcus Thorne became a quiet legend within the intelligence and special operations communities, a case study in both vulnerability and resilience. Its legacy was not one of public fanfare, but of profound, systemic change. In the wake of the exposure of Commander Weston's treason and the existence of Durov's horrific asset-stripping ring, the Department of the Navy and SOCOM initiated a sweeping overhaul of their personnel security and recovery protocols. Codenamed the Thorn Directive, the new policies implemented multi-layered verification for any operator declared lost in action, requiring not just circumstantial evidence but forensic and intelligence confirmation. Mission data streams were given new levels of encryption, and a new counterintelligence unit was formed specifically to monitor and protect special operators from threats of abduction and exploitation. Marcus Thorne's ordeal, born of betrayal, became the catalyst for safeguarding a generation of future warriors. But the true legacy of the story transcends policy and protocol. It is a powerful testament to a universal truth, the enduring power of a promise, and the unyielding strength of human connection. It became a story about a father's love, as Marcus's dad, upon seeing his son again, simply hugged him for 10 straight minutes, a silent transfer of a decade's worth of hope. It was a story about the unbreakable bonds of brotherhood, as Sully and the other retired operators risked their freedom to bring one of their own back from the dark. Above all, it was the story of Anya Sharma, her refusal to let Marcus fade into a memory, her decade of faithful grief, and her fierce determination in the face of impossible odds became the narrative's emotional core. Her love was the anchor that held firm against the tides of time, conspiracy, and trauma. It reminds us that even in a world of high-tech espionage and shadowy wars, the most powerful forces are still the fundamental human emotions: love, loyalty, and the stubborn, irrational hope that a light can still be found, even after 10 years of darkness. A man erased by his enemies, a fiancé who refused to forget him, and a digital ghost that bridged the impossible distance between them. The saga of Marcus Thorne is a stark reminder that in the battle between calculated evil and enduring love, the deepest human bonds can ultimately prove to be the most formidable weapon of all. If this incredible story of survival, betrayal, and unwavering loyalty moved you, please show your support by liking, sharing, and subscribing for more true crime mysteries. We want to hear from you in the comments. After a decade of trauma and reprogramming, do you believe a person can ever truly come all the way back?